Hello you lovely lot and welcome to a new video. My name is Katie and for no reason at all I just wanted to use some Winsor & Newton inks and just create something with them. I've been on a little mission just lately, when I say a little mission it's far from it, of trying to tidy my studio space up. I rearranged some of the furniture in there and obviously when you do that you come across things and I came across these lovely little bottles of ink. I've had these for quite some time now, quite a lot of years, and they just don't seem to get used very often, so I thought I'll play with these rather than continue to sort my room out. I kept the colour selection pretty simple by just using the Indian ink, cobalt blue, carmine, apple green and canary yellow. I do also add a little bit of highlighting a little later on in the video with the Kuretake white. I'd featured it in the white ink video. This all kind of escalated from a doodle that I was just tinkering around with on some watercolour paper. That paper is the Aquarello by Carta Pura. It's 270 grams and it's 100% cotton, and I got that back I want to say in November when I went to Choosing Keeping, and it's lovely paper to work on. And I just thought this picture that I'd drawn would actually make quite a nice video, and I thought I'd use these inks which heavily distracted me from tidying my room. I'd outlined everything beforehand using the Faber-Castell Pitt liners, and the reason I did that was it's an Indian ink based pen and I thought that would go down quite well with the bottled variety I was using. And now that most of that is out of the way, let me explain a little bit more of what's going on. So as you'll see at the start of the video, I gave everything a bit of a wash with some clean water, and then I added a very diluted amount of that Indian ink with that water and just created some random textures in the background there. Sometimes there is nothing more daunting than a pristine sheet of paper, especially if you're going to be adding colours on there, so I eliminated that. Now yes, I did draw it out beforehand, but sometimes that stark outlining can be a little intimidating, and since as this was just for funsies, I wanted to make sure it was remaining a fun experience. You'll also notice there's a bit of an Art Nouveau pattern going on there, and I just thought, well, why not? And I'd use my French curve tools to create the majority of that. You'll see that I added a layer of purple, and I created that by mixing that cobalt with that carmine, and that just created the purple I wanted. Now I do have some other Winsor & Newton inks. I have a chestnut brown, I have a silver one, I also have a plum colour, but for some reason that just seems opaque. I've never really liked using that ink for drawing with, or at least colouring in areas, just because of that, so that's why I decided to omit that colour. And the chestnut brown and the silver, I just didn't think there would be any need to use them on this picture, so I am really quite keeping it simple. For the background, I'm adding additional layers of that diluted Indian ink. I did add a little bit more of the ink to that mixture just to give it a little bit more depth, and I love how that turned out because, you know, we have an octopusy, squiddy kind of figure at the front here. I don't really know what was going through my mind whilst I was drawing this, but you know, that's what happened. But I could put a little bit more thought into where the colour placement was and those textures in the background, and having all of that blotty ink just seemed like the right thing to do, and it kind of looks like she's underwater, I guess. I decided to take a similar approach with the tentacles that are on her head, and again I just added it in semi-irregular areas. I did want to keep some areas quite light just to give the impression of highlights there, but mainly it was just to get some texture down. So why did I settle on the Winsor & Newton inks? Because like I say, I'm sorting my whole studio out, and if you're a bit of a regular here, you'll know I've got quite a few mediums to go through. Well, I seem to have got my painting hat back on lately, and maybe that's because of the gouache videos as well as a few other water-based mediums I've been using, and I think part of me just wanted to continue with that. I quite easily could have used a watercolour palette to colour everything in here, but I wanted the transparency more than anything. And not only that, I wanted the permanence that these inks provide. You'll have seen very recently that we've received some Viviva watercolour sheets in the recent upgrade, and you'll also know that I have another Viviva set as well as peerless watercolours, and well, why didn't I use those instead? The main reason is the permanence of these inks. Once they are dry, they don't really budge. That means, yes, it's not very forgiving, but you know, I think I applied the ink pretty lightly on here. Another reason is because, again, this is down to their permanence, but I didn't want any colour bleeds. Now, I know I've got very unpredictable textures in the background, but that's as far as I wanted it on certain areas of the character. Like, for example, on her face, I didn't particularly want too much colour runnage there, so these inks were just perfect for adding those shadows and highlights, and then it would dry and it would stay like that. Another reason, I guess, why these inks distracted me a little bit more than the colour sheets I've got knocking about is the actual tones of colours. Now, I love using the peerless and the Viviva and the watercolour inks as well as the brushos. They're all fabulous to use, and at a stretch as well, watercolour pens. However, yes, you do have a beautiful vibrancy, but I do feel like there's a bit of a trade-off. Everything, at least in my experience, and again, you know, I guess I could learn a little bit more how to tackle this, and maybe I will at some point, but there seems to be a very unnatural balance with the tones of colours. It's difficult to describe, but everything's just a little bit too vibrant. The inks allow me to be a little bit more muted and a lot less vibrant, and that's what I wanted for this. She's not some chirpy mermaid, she's a badass octopus girl. And as well, the colours move ever so slightly differently, especially when you've got a couple of layers built up. You'll see it kind of reaches a point where the inks don't spread so rapidly, perhaps compared to these watercolour dyes like the sheets. And I was at a stage on this picture where I did need things to get more predictable as more of the picture progressed. But anyway, that seems like a very long-winded discussion as to how these inks distracted me whilst tidying my studio. Oh, can anyone else relate to that? You know, when you're sorting your space out and you start finding things, maybe an old sketchbook, and then, you know, an hour's passed because you've gone through about 5 other old sketchbooks. I'm terrible for that, and but I'm not complaining because I actually kind of enjoy looking through a load of my old stuff, whether it be materials or old artworks. But anyway, I'm waffling. A lot of this painting has happened whilst I've been going down memory lane there. So, as a bit of a contrasting colour, I thought adding a bit of green in there would be just the ticket. It kind of makes her seem a little bit more like a villain. For the underside of the tentacles, as well as adding tones into her hair, that green just again creates a bit of a difference in composition where the colour placement is. This is somewhere where I really did actually need that control of colour, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out. By this stage though, quite a lot of ink had accumulated over the page, so I thought, well, let's go over it all again with a liner pen, because you know I love doing that. Again, sticking to the Faber-Castell Pitt liners, it did just the right job. It wasn't too much of a difference from what I'd already put down. I varied between using the medium and the small sizes, obviously the medium being slightly thicker and great for the outer outlines, and then that small one is for the more detailed areas like the parts of the tentacles as well as her facial features, and it just worked out really nice. It also brought forward some of those details that I felt had been lost before progressing to adding some more ink. As much as I liked her blue skin tone, I just needed to add a little bit of warmth in there, so I added a bit more outline, well, shadow area with that purple I'd mixed, and then I gave everything a bit of a wash in that carmine. And this literally did just add a bit of colour into her cheeks, which is what I wanted. I decided at this point though she was standing out in all the wrong kinds of ways from the background, so it seemed like a good time to just introduce some random splotches of those colours to the background over that black ink, and I quite like how it turned out. It just adds a nice randomness to it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I needed to add some highlights. I just wasn't neat or tidy enough to omit adding paint to those areas, so good old white ink did the job there. This was perfect for making certain features on her stand out a little bit more, especially her nose and cheekbones, as well as on all of those tentacles there. I chose the Kuretake, which is the Zig Kuretake, because that's just my favourite ink, well, white ink to work with. I think that was my favourite one out of the ones I chose. And that's not to say the other ones that I have I didn't like, it's just this one worked best for me. I liked the flow best, and it's just a little bit more opaque. And again, I just love how this made her stand out, especially when I started adding the details on her hair. Just added a little bit more movement because that bottom left hand corner was just looking a little bit too, well, it didn't look like there was all that much going on, so those highlights did the job. And when I'd done that, I just added a few more shadows using a Faber-Castell Pitt pen again, and I just extended some of the areas with that white. And yeah, I quite like how this random picture that I absolutely needed to do turned out. I can't really say this is a review of these inks because I don't really have many bottles of these types of inks to work with. I have acrylic inks, but I don't think these are the same, so it's unfair to say this is a review without having anything else to compare it to. And maybe I just wanted to bring you along for the ride of my distraction whilst trying to tidy my studio space up. Of course, as always, I do hope this may have helped if you are using inks at the moment, and maybe you've picked up some tips, or you've just simply enjoyed watching. Either way, thank you so much. I'll see you lovely lot soon. Bye!